Welcome to Mom's Grab Coffee, where you'll be filled with wisdom, faith, and hope through real testimonies from moms of how God works in our lives. I'm your host, Hannah Lapsansky, and I invite you to pull up a chair, grab a cup of coffee, and get ready, my friend. We're about to speak the truth. Yeah, to me it sounds like you are trying to find your purpose.
Yes, I spent a lot of my life, and sometimes, I'm still there. But if I just open my hands and I say, okay, God, it's yours, failure or success, then I can relax a little more and just know the Lord wants me to rest in Him. It's not up to me to make all these things happen. And so I found so much freedom in that.
Hey friend, today we're going to talk about that big old, beautiful, hard, tough as nails S word. Yep, I'm talking about surrender. Mom of four and author of Made for More, Lauren Elizabeth Miller is here with me today to talk about her testimony of walking away from her corporate ladder dreams and walking into a greater purpose that was led by the Lord instead of what was her former personal ambition. Growing up, she was a perfectionist. She had her lists, she had her plans, she knew exactly what she needed to do in order to keep climbing that corporate ladder. But it was all thrown out the window when she felt a calling from God to adopt. And so you're going to hear what she calls a tale of two adoptions, along with what surrender looked like for her and how that has led her to freedom, as well as a level of joy and peace that she didn't have before. So let's get started, my friend. It is my pleasure to welcome Lauren Elizabeth Miller and her story. And I have your book here, Made for More, My Story of God's Grace and Glory, and we're certainly going to go into that. I read the book myself. I loved it. I got a lot out of it. And so we're going to go through highlights of it, as well as your testimony and what brought you to writing the book, as well as what brought you to surrender. But before we go into all of that, let's just talk about what surrender means, especially in the shoes of a perfectionist.
Yeah. So one of the biggest things I feel like I always start with is I am a work in progress. And I guess the first thing is that I have to acknowledge that a lot of times perfectionism is what I'm going to lean into first. And it's not something that has magically disappeared. Like, that's how God wired me. And it's okay. It can also be a positive thing. And so I've had to learn kind of how to think through things. And really, one of the biggest things that I've had to learn is how to extend grace to others, but especially myself. I tend to be harder on myself than others, really. So there's always that, I guess I would say, fight against not living in shame if things are not perfect. And just coming to the realization that God can use positive things and negative things for His glory. Just having that mindset is really how, as a perfectionist, I've learned to just continue to surrender. And over the years, I've just become better at it just because I know that's my mindset and I know how I'm wired. And the Lord has just turned it into something that is good.
Yeah, I think your story is really interesting because it's perfectionism based on you as a working mom. So you came from, I think it was the corporate world or, the business world.
Yes.
And then there's also the mom aspect. I mean, there's so many different ways where we can feel guilty or that we have to be perfect as a, career woman or as a mom, as a wife even. So you said that you're learning how to extend grace to yourself. So what does that actually look like?
So I guess I'll start with an example. With working and being a mom, I have over the years dealt with a lot of mom guilt, whether I feel like I am not at home enough or I'm not at work enough. Like there's always that balance where I feel like I felt in the past like I've been letting someone down. So just really giving that to the Lord and just realizing, I have these thoughts in my head that no one else has, and continuing to give my thought life to the Lord and just
Mm,
work through that mom guilt, because it's so rampant at times in our lives as moms.
yeah.
Um, it's like I tell my oldest all the time, I'm learning with her. And
Hmm.
so every stage of motherhood, I just feel like I'm learning, and it's easy to feel like I'm not doing my best. But
Hmm.
I'm also, my kids are watching, and I know that they're learning from me, and I don't want them, to the best that I can live it out in front of them, I don't want them to feel this way when they're a parent. So I try to, apologize or just, yeah, just talk through some of those situations.
Hmm. Yeah, and I love that you said you give your thought life to the Lord. And I like the fact that you gave your thoughts a little bit more weight by calling it your thought life, if that makes sense. Because I think that's so important to do. And it's a constant thing. Throughout the day, we have millions of thoughts. And for me personally, I'll wake up feeling great and, read the word and feel really energized. And then 30 minutes later, I read something about someone on, social media or heard something. And I'm like, oh man, I feel guilty that I didn't do that. Or, oh man, I should go and do that. And then I start really, like my thoughts start swirling. So then I have to
Mm-hmm.
go remember to go back to the Lord and just give that to Him. So I like that you named it your thought life. As we think about extending grace and surrendering our plans so that the Lord's plan can really dominate and lead in our life, what can we gain by doing that?
So, one of the things that I feel like has been my biggest gain since really giving my thought life and just surrendering is that God's plans turn into my plans. I can
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
tell him my dreams and my desires, but really, my dreams and desires tend to turn into what he has for me in the long run. So, if we go back to talking about when I really wanted to be a career woman and, in my mind, get the right degrees, get the good jobs, climb the corporate ladder, be a good spouse, be a mom, 2 kids, ended up with 4, And
Yeah.
so I never imagined my life would be what it is now. But I am so content. I know that I'm where the Lord has me. Being able to be a mom and be at home and, do my blog and write my book, those were things I never imagined would happen in my life. But it's been so good and it's been so rich, and the Lord has just, he's used it all. Like, I have always loved writing. And so I've loved to see how that has become such a huge part of my life. Like, I remember as a child, I don't know, I was probably like 10, between the age of 10 and 12. And I remember sitting down, I wrote a book, and like I made a cover for it and everything. And
Mm-hmm.
right, like I was on the newspaper staff in high school and college. My minor was journalism. I just love how that was always kind of in the background of my life, and how God's really brought it to the forefront of my life.
Mm-hmm.
And he's allowed me to, live in this space where I could be home with my kids, but also have this career that I never imagined. And
Mm-hmm.
it's just been so good and so rich, like I said.
Yeah. And I love that you allowed your dreams and your goals to shift, to align with God's plan. Because if you were marching down the path of climbing that corporate ladder because you said that's your one and only dream, that's kind of like tunnel vision, like that's what I'm going for, then that makes it really hard for the
Yes.
Lord to come in and work on your heart and allow these other greater things to happen.
Yes. Like my job right out of college, it was a very good job, and I worked in human resources, and the company I worked for, they were all about growth, and they basically could tell me, like, if you do these things, like, you'll grow and go up the ladder. And
Mm-hmm.
at that time, I was like, yes, this is me. Like, if you give me a checklist, you tell me what to do, I can do it
Mm-hmm.
and do it well.
Yeah.
And so what I love about my life now is it's not easy. As, a writer, I get rejected a lot, and
Mm-hmm.
things don't go well at times, and it's hard, but God gets the glory, because there's been times where I am like, I did nothing to make this happen, and it happened. And so I just feel like God is glorified through that so much, because it's not me.
The fact that you're content with that, facing disappointments and failures and things like that, that you're totally at peace with it is, wow, such a testament to God as well as your trust in Him. So let's get into the specifics of your story here in terms of how you've experienced surrender and journeyed to get to that point.
Yeah. When we felt called to adopt, so I guess I'll add to my story here. My youngest two kiddos are adopted. And when our family decided when Scott and I decided we were called to adopt, that is really when I feel like God began to peel back the layers. And when I had to start letting go, I could not, I could do the paperwork for adoption and I could do it well, but that didn't matter as far as how things were going to turn out with the process. And we did do international adoption.
And were you still working in the corporate world at this time?
Yes, I had left my first job actually. And when we were doing my daughter's adoption, I was actually working in a church. I was the business administrator. I was working full time. And then after she came home is when I left working outside of the home completely. And that is kind of when I shifted to being a mom and I started writing my book.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, that must be a journey in and of itself.
Yes.
Going from, climbing the corporate ladder to, uh, working for a church and then becoming a mom and a writer.
Yes, and it all happened within a span of 2 to 3 years. And then, coming home, my daughter is from China, coming home from China, that first year, whether you birth a baby or adopt a child, it is just, you have all the hormones and you're
Hmm.
just going through all the big life changes. And so that year was tough because I had given up, climbing the corporate ladder. And I thought, okay, nonprofit work and like working at a church, like, yes. And then it was like, no, like that's not what God has for me. And so that year was tough. I just felt like my life changed so much in so many ways.
Hmm. Yeah, to me, it sounds like you are trying to find your purpose.
Yes. Yes. I spent a lot of my life and sometimes, I mean, I'm still there in some ways. And the Lord has just, like I said, if I just open my hands and I say, okay, God, it's yours, failure or success. What do you want from me?
Mm-hmm.
Then I can relax a little more and just know the Lord wants me to rest in Him. It's not up to me to make all these things happen. And I can be content if not a lot's happening or if a lot is happening. And
Hmm.
so I found so much freedom in that.
And so, what was that turning point at which you knew you needed to trust God and find your purpose through Him versus trying to find it yourself?
I like to call our adoptions the tale of two adoptions. And this is actually not in my book. I always, you hear authors say, oh, I wish I could go back and like rewrite a part of my book. So this is one of those areas I wish I could add it, not really rewrite it, but add this to the
Mm-hmm.
book. So our adoptions, I refer to them as the tale of two adoptions because my daughter's adoption was, I hate to say the word easy because there's no adoption that's easy, but everything went right. And from start to finish, it was 18 months, which is very fast for an international adoption. We even got to travel earlier than we expected. Like the Lord was just opening doors, and she actually had some kind of scary stuff in her file, and she ended up being healthy. All this
Mm-hmm.
stuff that, just went so well through our human eyes. And then my son's adoption was almost the exact opposite. Brielle's adoption took 18 months from start to finish, and his adoption took 3 years. So it was like everything was
Wow.
doubled with his
Mm-hmm.
adoption. And it made me go to a new level of surrender because,
Mm-hmm.
as you can tell from this conversation, I did all the paperwork right. And even though I did it right, we were actually at the point where we were getting ready to travel and pick up our son. Oh, by the way, COVID was happening during this as well. So we were going through all of that. Like,
Mm.
are we going to be able to travel? All of that worry on top of getting him home. Our paperwork was actually declined at the very end. They wanted us to read our home study. And we had already done 2 or 3 home studies. And I just remember being so frustrated and just telling the Lord, like, I did everything right and it still didn't
Mm.
matter.
Mm-hmm. Like you checked all the boxes.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
And, the thing that I still to this day, I'm like, I'm never going to understand this. We did hurry and do a brand new home study in like a month,
Mm-hmm.
which is like unheard of. Our agency was so great. And the day that new home study was being sent, we actually got an email, and it didn't say this, but in so many words, it was like, oops, like, never mind, we'll accept your home study that was already here. And I was just like,
Oh,
why,
geez.
Lord? Why
Yeah.
did we have to go through that? And we ended up getting a judge that was rotating out. And so he ended up coming home a few months later than he could have come home, and
Mm-hmm.
so, the tale of 2 adoptions here, but the Lord used both situations, like if I look at my daughter's adoption and, if we're going to say like that process was a success, like the Lord showed up in that. My son's adoption, the Lord also showed up in that, even though it was so hard. But we had
Mm-hmm.
people that loved on us, and the Lord just used that time to draw me to Him. And in
Mm-hmm.
those moments where I did everything right, but things weren't going well, I could rely on
Yeah.
Him. And so I was so glad I had the years of seeing the Lord's faithfulness. And with my son's adoption, it was kind of like, I think of in Matthew when Peter was walking on the water towards Jesus. And when he looked at the waves, he looked at the chaos, he sank, and
Mm-hmm.
with my son's adoption, I just had to keep telling myself, keep your eyes on Jesus. Because if not, you're going to sink,
Mm.
but
Yeah.
that was such a growth point for me. And so
Mm-hmm.
now that it's over and he's home and he's doing great, I can be thankful for that. And I can, share on this podcast of the Lord's faithfulness through, successful times and times that are very hard.
Yeah. The fact that you trusted God in 2 very different circumstances is such a powerful testimony, and that He grew your faith. I mean, between the 2, would you say your faith was strengthened in one circumstance more than the other?
I would say the Lord met me where I was at. When we adopted our daughter, that was kind of towards the beginning where I was really starting to surrender and be like, okay, you are a perfectionist. Like, you're not allowing the Lord to do all the things in your life that He wants to do because you're holding on to everything so tightly. And
Mm-hmm.
her adoption began that process. Like, during her adoption, when we started the process, we were not aware that China had moved to completely a special needs program. And
Mm-hmm.
so, even just with that, we felt a couple years before we started the process that the Lord was calling us to China. So, when we realized after feeling that calling that we were going to be looking through lists of special needs, I originally said, like, okay, Lord, you got this wrong. I'm not the girl. Like, I was still working.
Mm.
I still wanted a career and all of those
Yep.
things. And I cried a lot. And that was the beginning of Him just being like, I've called you to this and you're going to be okay. And the Lord
Mm.
just changed my heart, and He brought me peace. And I'm so glad we didn't say no because she's amazing. I can't imagine not having her in our family. And so that has just grown and compounded. And so when we were adopting my son and COVID was happening, I mean, like I said, it was very hard, but I was also like, the Lord has called us to this, and like, look what he did before. And I know he'll do all that again.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was really
Yeah.
just compounded over the years.
Wow, that's amazing. And what were the things that you did to keep the foundation of your faith strong and to keep pressing forward?
Yeah. So staying in his word, so important.
Mm-hmm.
I can always tell if I'm not spending as much time in the word. It affects my attitude and just my outlook.
Yeah.
And constantly just spending time with the Lord through prayer. Also watching what I put in my mind. We were talking about social media and news and just kind of staying away from negativity at times, especially
Mm-hmm.
during the days of, with COVID and trying to travel to get our son, who is from Korea, South Korea. So I'd always want to know, like, okay, what's going on with South Korea right now? What's going on with the United States? Where are we at with all of that? And just having to, protect my mind
Mm-hmm.
and just know that the Lord was in control. No matter what the news said, I had to just give it to the Lord. And so
Yes.
those are
So
some practical
important.
things. Yeah.
Yeah, especially, every day it feels like the world is getting scarier, and it's easy to fall into that. But yep,
Yes.
going back to giving your thought life to the Lord. Lauren, I want to go through your book now. I love it because first of all, it's encapsulated in this idea of being made for more. But I love the chapters that you have here. I think it really resonated with me as a mom. I have a full-time job as well. So in terms of me as a working mom as well. So you have titles like Made for More Than Perfection, Made for More Than Guilt, Made for More Than Manipulation, complacency. You talk about that. So there's so many aspects that resonated with me here. And I want to go through a couple of questions here that I think will give moms a lot of wisdom and hope, especially when it comes to this idea of mom guilt. So let's talk about your shift in terms of how you view failures and guilt. What did that shift look like?
So I have come to embrace that the Lord can use failure just as much as he can use success, and sometimes failure even more, because he can redeem and
Mm-hmm.
restore it, whatever happens. And with guilt, guilt condemns us and Jesus
Mm-hmm.
frees us, I guess would be the easy way to say that. I know that the Lord does not want me to live in shame if things don't go my way, or, if I fail, whether I mean to fail or not. I know that he does not want me to stay stuck in that, because as a perfectionist, and, there's a people pleasing side to me as well. And so I can be so hard on myself. And if something bad happens one day, I could dwell on that. And then
Mm-hmm.
that's
Yep.
taking, back to our thought life, that is taking my thoughts and putting them like on a negative track, I guess, not the way the Lord wants me to think. Like John 3:17 says, God did not send his son into the world to condemn the world, but to save the world. And so I have to
Mm-hmm.
look through that lens at failure and guilt.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I want to pull out one quote in your book here. And you said, how great it is to know that through disappointments, I get more Jesus. And I love that because when you have more Jesus, you also have more peace, you have more joy, you have more assurance, and you're not dwelling in your disappointments and starting to spiral into, I'm not good enough, or I don't matter, or I'm a failure. Um, so I just love that. I underlined it. I highlighted it. I what do you call that? Like folded the page. So that really resonated with me. My next question here is, as a former perfectionist, you knew your next step. You had a firm plan. You had your checklist. You had your, here's what I need to do to get to where I want to go. Now that you're kind of on the 180, you're trusting God with the plan for your life. What do you do when you start feeling yourself hesitating to move to that next step, or trying to manipulate a situation so that it results in a certain outcome?
Yes, I spend more time in the Word, and I have friends even that I can kind of talk through, okay, this is what's happening, and I know this is why I'm doing it, and I don't want to do that. And my husband Scott is also very good at helping me think through situations and why I may be thinking a certain way towards something. And so just building in that community that knows me and
Mm-hmm.
loves me, and they can speak life into me and I trust them. I have a few people that I know I can text at any moment and just say, hey, I need you to pray for me about this. And so building
Mm-hmm.
that in on top of just spending time with the Lord has really been good because it helps keep me accountable. Because as I said, I'm a work in progress and I am not perfect. So
Mm-hmm.
I've had to
Yeah.
do those things and build those things into my life and make them a priority.
Yeah, and those reminders, I completely resonate with that as well. And I think we see that in the Bible too. I mean, even with the disciples who are with Jesus and they saw these miracles firsthand, they had many moments of doubt. And so, constantly being reminded and using other people that God has placed in our lives to keep us strong and keep us moving forward into, I guess, kind of the unknown. Like God knows the plan, but we don't always know the plan.
Yes. Yes.
And so, pressing forward using people, I love that. All right. So, Lauren, I have one more question for you. As we think about moms who feel like they're not fulfilling the dreams and goals that they have for their own life, maybe they feel like every day all they're doing is changing diapers, chasing kids, disciplining, and they kind of feel drained because they don't feel like they're doing enough in their life. What would you like to say to them in terms of how we still live for God today through those what feel like mundane moments?
I would say that Jesus truly wants more for every mom. I mean, more than you could ever imagine. And that is often found through chasing kids, changing diapers, making meals, disciplining. If we are a working mom, the schedule and all of that, we may not see it this side of heaven, but I just know there is such an eternal impact with those things. And, it can just be hard to measure
Mm-hmm.
in with our human minds. I often, I tell God about my big dreams, and He often reminds me to just love on my kids right now. Because I can be so hard on myself. I can want to be a go getter. I can want to do all these things or change things. And often He's like, just love the people right in front of you and let me handle the rest. And as every day,
Mm-hmm.
just making those choices to be where God wants you to be and finding contentment in Him, it's so freeing. So I would say to every mom, just continue to pursue the Lord. Whether you're feeling fulfilled or empty, just allow Him into those spaces and He'll just make so much goodness out of it.
Yeah, I love that. And I think, God shows us little glimpses of the impact we're having on our kids, especially when we have little ones and we feel like all we're doing is staying at home, doing these,
Yes.
boring things. I think He does show us glimpses of the impact we're having. I mean, with my daughter, she recently reminded me, hey, we should pray. Everything was very chaotic and I was trying to get everything on the table. And she was like, oh, we got to pray. I'm like, oh, okay. Things are sinking in. What I feel
Yes.
like are these little, like, I'm just saying it real quick, like, oh, let's pray and try to teach her. But sometimes I forget. She's keeping me accountable too. And
Yes.
so, yeah, just finding those little moments, I think are so important.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, Lauren, I loved the book. It is called Made for More, My Story of God's Grace and Glory. Where can moms get it and where can they go to connect with you?
Yes. So the easiest way, it's one stop, is my website, and that is laurenelizabethmiller.com. And there you will find all my social media links. I have a newsletter. I also have a page all about my book. It is available on Amazon, Target, any website that sells books. Basically, you would be able to find it there. So whatever your preference is, if you would like a copy of the book. But everything is on my website.
Awesome. Thank you, Lauren. We'll have a direct link to that in the show notes. And thank you so much for sharing your heart and wisdom today. This was fantastic.
Thank you for having me.
All right, that was Lauren Elizabeth Miller. And as always, before I close out the episode, I like to leave you with a few reminders of what she said. First, remember this. When we take the step to surrender, we're not stepping out alone. God has already been preparing you for that moment if you choose to take it. With Lauren, it was her writing. She never thought she'd be an author, but it was always somehow part of her life, even going all the way back to childhood. Let's take a look at Matthew in the Bible. He was a tax collector, and as a tax collector, they were despised and they were known to be deceitful. But in order to be a good tax collector, they had to be excellent at record keeping. Matthew probably had no idea that he was going to be a disciple or follower of Jesus. But as he was disciplining himself in record keeping through tax collection, when he made the decision to surrender and follow Jesus, the Lord used his skill to record the events of the Messiah. In other words, the skill that he had been building up for years was used for a new, mighty purpose. The other point I want to remind you of is that God's provision may not look like the provision you're expecting. In fact, it may look completely different. But remember what Lauren shared. God's plans turn into your plans, and it'll be better, it'll be greater, and it will be more freeing. To get a copy of Made for More and connect with Lauren, you can visit her website, which I'll have in the show notes, as well as momsgrabcoffee.com/30. If you haven't already, make sure you are following and subscribed to the show wherever you are listening to this podcast, because I have some amazing guests coming up who are going to talk about anger and rage and motherhood and how we get over those really high stress, near explosive moments, along with more ways to stay connected with God through our really busy days. Okay, friend, that is a wrap for today. Have an amazing week, and I'll catch you again next time for a cup of coffee with a side of faith, wisdom, and hope.